video?
Yeah, I'm going to try and get a hold of Khalil. I'm going to try and get a hold of Khalil. If we could all mute and turn off our videos except for Gwen, that would be wonderful.
Welcome to DE&I. This session will begin soon.
Welcome, everybody, to the Driving Corporate Purpose track. Welcome to our second panel, Innovations in Driving DE&I. In this panel, we will look at what companies are doing to ensure diversity across their leadership pipeline and the next frontiers in this space, and where they are seeing impact in terms of diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging. To kick off this panel, we welcome Suba Berry, CEO of Saramount. Saramount is a key partner organization with the Women Business Collaborative and chairs our DEI Action Initiative. Suba, take it away.
Thank you so much, Gwen and Edie. I'm Suba Berry. I'm the chair of the C-Suite Initiative at WBC, and I'm the president of Saramount, which is a professional services and research firm dedicated to advancing diversity, equity, and inclusion in our workplaces. Our capabilities, including insights, consulting, membership, learning and development, and events, are aligned with being a business services company with end-to-end solutions for creating inclusive cultures. Saramount has been a partner of the Women's Business Collaborative right from the beginning, and we work together to advance women to the highest ranks of leadership, to address societal challenges that force so many younger women and women of color out of the workforce. There are many topics we could discuss today, but we decided to focus on two key issues with this panel: mitigating bias in the interview process during recruitment, and the concept of intersectional allyship. Together, we will discuss how we build inclusive, equitable workplaces where women and underrepresented talent can thrive, be able to visualize the future, and how they can help get you where you ultimately want to be. How lifting each other up can have an impact both on corporate America as well as broadly across all of our communities. Our goal for this discussion today is that you all leave with actionable takeaways that can be implemented within your own organizations. So, over the past 2 years, there's been an increased focus on bolstering the recruitment and hiring practices of underrepresented talent. And unfortunately, many organizations continue to still face serious obstacles. Even organizations that have taken many of the necessary steps to building inclusive cultures by providing things like unconscious bias training, workshops for all employees, or implementing sponsorship, mentorship programs, investing in employee resource groups, still say they struggle. It is challenging to consistently find diverse interview slates or to be intentional about presenting a diverse slate of candidates. Think about an organization that says, we intend to have diverse slates of candidates for every spot. And yet, when pressed, the leader says, I need somebody within the next month. So being able to wait till you get that diverse interview, a set of talent becomes a big challenge for organizations. We found some information that you may also find interesting. 81% of the companies on our 2021 Inclusion Index require diverse interview slates. 94% of the companies on the 2021 Inclusion Index provide training for recruiters on cultural competency during interviews. So what that tells us is that the effort is being made, and yet why is progress so slow? Why are the results so slow? But we know that diversity suffers and it breaks down in middle management, because there simply is not enough focus in the minds and in the leadership styles of middle managers. And can we really blame them? We demand so much of our middle managers without adequately equipping them with the skills and the resources to do better. If we were able to do a better job of building those skills, will our pipelines of women and underrepresented talent who report to these managers, will they grow? Will they be retained? Can we get a better results? These are the questions and issues that the panelists and I are going to tackle today. And we have three absolutely fantastic panelists today with us. Michelle Gadsden Williams, who's the Managing Director, Global Head of Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion at BlackRock. So Michelle, if you would come on. Jolinda Johnson, Vice President of Diversity, Inclusion, and Belonging, Strategy and Equity at Capital One. Welcome, Jolinda. And Khalil Smith, Vice President of Inclusion, Diversity, and Engagement at Akamai Technologies. So I want to kick off with my first question. I want to make sure that all our panelists are here. I just want to make sure that my view allows me to see the gallery so I can see all their faces. Well, welcome everybody. My first question is to Khalil. You came from the Neuro Leadership Institute, which has done such a great job of making that sort of connection between the importance of soft skills for leaders and how that impacts and affects implementing change. Now that you're at Akamai, which is such a data-driven tech company, so tell me, what role does data play to eliminate bias in processes, and do make that connection between the intertwining of data and the soft skills in building strong leadership traits?
Yeah, absolutely. So it's good to be with you, good to be with all of you, and wonderful to be on the panel. I think in a lot of ways, Neuro Leadership Institute and Akamai are two sides of the coin. We're talking about kind of what diversity benefits, how it benefits, how we do that. That's what Neuro Leadership Institute is thinking about, is what's going on in the brain, what is the social psychology, what is the neuroscience, what are the behavioral economics, but ultimately they're looking at how do you apply that in organizations as well. And similarly at Akamai, which is a data-driven organization, any company that says they're data-driven may be more data-driven than most, but we're still run by people. We're run by humans, and all of those humans have brains, and all of those brains have bias. And so when we bring those things together, ultimately the neuroscience is data-driven, it's research-driven, it is, kind of repeatable and focused. And so that's what we find, and it's one of the reasons that we've taken so much of Neuro Leadership Institute's content and applied it at Akamai, because the rigor that goes into that is incredibly valuable when married with folks that say, show me the value, help me understand, like, how do we build better processes? Because I think the vast majority of folks that were doing this work for the sheer kind of cultural significance of it are already convinced, right? We're already there, we're already ready to go. What we're trying to do is bring everyone along and bring kind of the head, the heart, and the hands to say, how do we understand it intellectually? How do we systematize it? How do we bake it into the things that we need to do? And also, how do we care deeply about this so that it's not just a box that we're checking or something that we're doing on the side? And so I don't know, I know some of our folks even hesitate to call it the soft skills, because these are the really, really challenging things that we do as leaders. So marrying those things together to us is kind of, they are by no means mutually exclusive. And I think in most ways they are harmonious in terms of coming together.
Well, Khalil, that is so well put, because, what we used to consider quote unquote soft skills, the empathy, the being able to be vulnerable, relatable, all of that are leadership competencies that people are acknowledging. This is what you're going to need to lead in the future that we're facing today.
Yes.
Well, my next question is actually to Michelle. You and I go back a while, and you have been through this DEI journey over the last 15, 20 years. From your vantage point, can you share some examples of companies that are doing a good job of adopting these tactics and techniques to, especially, let's hone in on the recruitment process, because so many mistakes happen right there in that point in time. Share some ideas and examples, best practices that you've seen, Michelle.
Thank you, Suba, and thank you for having me. So in my view, there are several tactics and techniques that companies can use in order to eliminate bias from the interview process. The first of which is seeking to understand. So when it comes to biases and hiring, there needs to be an acknowledgement that biases, oftentimes unconscious, can definitely creep into the recruiting process. So you'll need to understand what are some of the biases, what they are, how they impact decisions, and what's required, education and awareness. One of the things that we do at BlackRock is we have our recruiters and our hiring managers go through cultural competency training to better understand cultural norms. And it's also the first step in really unraveling unconscious bias, since it allows an employee to recognize that they have biases of themselves or for themselves, and to identify their own biases and determine what are the steps an organization can take in order to minimize what they are. The second thing I would say is really re-examining job descriptions. Even subtle word choices can have a strong impact on an applicant pool. And research has shown that masculine language, including adjectives like competitive or determined, results in women perceiving that they would not belong in a particular work environment. So on the other hand, words like collaborative and cooperative tend to draw more women to specific roles more so than men. So there's software programs, and we also have one of our own that highlights stereotypical language and words that can help counteract some of these things that might occur. The other thing I would say is going blind in terms of the resume review process. Level the playing field and ensure that you're focused on the candidates' qualifications and talent, and not just the demographic characteristics. The fact that Letitia and Jamal, they don't get the same number of callbacks as Emily and Greg. You need to look at what each person brings to the table. So a blind, systemic process for reviewing applications and resumes, that will help you bring the most relevant candidates into your pool, and also uncovering some hidden gems. And then the last thing I would say is really setting diversity goals. Diversity goals are worthwhile. I know that there are some of us who have, look at this as quotas or something similar, but they make the issue of diversity and inclusion and equity front and center. And so I think we need to measure what we aspire to have. And so at the end of every hiring process, I would say leaders should track how well they've done against some of the diversity goals that they've set out to achieve. And this also encourages some of the hiring managers and other parts of the company to keep DEI front and center as it pertains to the hiring process.
Great points, Michelle. And I think I would say to myself, I consider myself more sensitive towards these things than most others. And I just recently made a faux pas. We were recruiting for a role in our organization. I was part of the interview process. And I speak to this woman who is very qualified. I think she would be amazing. And I looked at her and I thought, she's from the Midwest. She's a white woman. And I'm thinking to myself, and she's coming from academia, I'm scratching my head to say, where is that relevance? Where is that connective tissue? And, you know, I'm erring on the side of not being politically correct here, but I did say to her, can you tell me, I'm looking at you, you are a white woman from the Midwest. You seem to have had sort of the opportunity to jump from success to success. Can you tell me how this is relevant? Where's your passion around it? What is your lived experience that says you are right for this role? And it came pouring out. This woman who had grown up in relative poverty, who had not only faced housing insecurity and had been homeless for a while in her childhood, but who had had food insecurity, who's married to a Black man, who is biracial children that she has fostered and adopted. So it went on and on. By the time she was done, I said to her, you are freaking more qualified to do this than I am. But the reality is we make assumptions about people. And your point is so well made, Michelle, in terms of the kind of radar we need to have so that we can't completely remove the bias, but we need to find ways to be able to mitigate it. Thank you so much. Jolinda, you know, you came from government where they have been doing a lot of these things, practicing a lot of these things all along the way. And so how are you translating those to Capital One?
Thank you, Suba, for the question. And it's great to be here with the panel. I really appreciated so much of what Michelle shared. And I want to pull on a couple of those threads to talk about some of the things that are done in government and have been done for years that maybe the private sector can take on. Michelle talked about setting goals. She talked about, importantly, what gets measured gets done. She also talked about tracking the hiring process and tracking the actual demographics through the hiring process. Suba, since we're talking about recruitment, I would get a little bit more granular and also track the recruitment process. We have a lot of companies who are striving for talent, who are competing for talent. And in doing so, they're also looking for diverse talent. But when internally you have those recruitment reports letting you know how we're doing on hiring, how we're moving along, it's important to include demographic information with that information so that we know what our slates look like. We know what our panels look like. We know what our interview slates look like. We know who's coming in the door, because that actually teaches us quite a bit about the return on investment for our recruitment efforts. Are we reaching out to the right places? We will only know that if we're actually counting and keeping track of that data. So the federal government for almost 20 years now has had a management directive that applies to all federal agencies that requires exactly this. It's an extensive amount of data collection. The other thing the federal government does with this data, by the way, is they're incredibly transparent with that. And I know that in the private sector, there are a lot of sensitivities around that. I really want to share with all of our attendees that that's a conversation we in the private sector need to have at a more robust level. The transparency of data is not just something that is called on from our employees who want to know that we are headed in the right direction and we're committed to doing so, but shareholders feel the same way, the public feels the same way, your customers feel the same way. So I would encourage us to take a lesson from the federal government that has been incredibly transparent, that you can do that and move forward. And as I like to say to folks, the sky didn't fall when we put all that data out.
You know, Jolinda, well said, is not only measure it, but then look at those and actually internalize it and do something about it. And that being transparent piece is really important, because it's like, I used to say this about any weight loss plan that I've ever been on. Once you tell everybody around you that you're going to be on a weight loss plan, all of a sudden when you're putting that cookie in your mouth, somebody says to you, Suba, didn't you say you were on a weight loss plan? So being transparent is somewhat about letting others know that this is where you stand so they can call you out when you're not doing the right things or not engaging in the right behaviors. Absolutely great points there. So Khalil, I want to come back to you. This underrepresented talent, you've managed to get them in the door. They are in the job. Can you talk about specifically at Akamai, what are you doing to eliminate those barriers through the talent cycle? Because it isn't as though, you know, once we get them through the door, we check that box and say, my God, we've got the representation. Now we need to keep them. So what is Akamai doing?
Yeah, and Suba, you know, to your point, it would be wonderful if we weren't all saying we've got them in the door and now we've checked that box. But I think to Jolinda's point and to Michelle's point about some of the data, what we see are organizations that do look a lot like pyramids, right? That have a decent amount of what we would refer to as representation or diversity in the lower levels, call centers, you know, entry-level roles, and then that starts to filter as you get higher and higher in the organization. And so we don't always see that same kind of focus on attention and attraction and retention and promotion, because it's not just keeping people in the same role, it's helping them grow through their careers. So I'll call out kind of 5 things that we do or have done that I think are useful in this space. And then just a quick kind of, you know, acronym that I use with my team quite a bit that really kind of focuses our strategy as a whole. So one thing that we do is we've embedded growth mindset and bias mitigation throughout our language and our talent processes. And part of the benefit to that is that in a lot of instances, the bias that we're talking about is you don't fit the mold for what I think this role is supposed to be. And when we believe that people either have it or they don't, it becomes very difficult to change people's perspective. And so if we can approach things with a growth mindset that says, we're all learning, we're all developing, what got us here won't get us there, our environment is changing and we need to change appropriately with it, well, then that naturally starts to open up more opportunities for folks who are what we probably call non-traditional talent in some of those roles. The second is that, you know, when you spoke about this before, educating our talent professionals and giving them a deeper dive. And Michelle, to your point about, you know, our recruiters, but we've done that with our human resource business partners as well. And they're a part of succession planning. So they're sitting side by side with their leaders and challenging, because those are people that can do that. So they're looking at it through the lens of some of the things we've discussed, but they're right there with their business partners saying, tell me about succession planning. Tell me about why you think that person is ready or isn't ready. Jolinda spoke eloquently about transparent data. We do that both internally and externally. So we share a lot of our data internally with our employee resource groups, with our employees on our internal intranet. And we also, for the past few years, have put it out on our website with our annual reports. So kind of, you know, we have our environmental, our sustainability, our inclusion, diversity, and engagement reports, and then a wrapper that really kind of brings all of those together. We also, and kind of 4 and 5 fit together in some ways, board and senior leader involvement and commitment. So right before this, I was on a call with our board talking about this very topic, and, you know, it was late to hopping on because there's such a degree of involvement and engagement in that space. And similarly, one of the things that they pushed us around is tying senior leader compensation to some of the same metrics and deliverables that we've talked about. You know, I could not agree more that you need to measure these things. And I don't know that anyone has ever said, well, don't give your salespeople goals, because if you do, you'll break the way you want. No, there's a goal, right? We expect you to do it with a high degree of integrity and authenticity. But yes, it's a goal. We have you because you're brilliant and you will figure out how to move mountains to do that thing in a way that aligns with our values. So to say if you put a metric around it, all of a sudden you're going to break something, I've never seen us talk about that with margins or revenue or customer growth or any other thing. So we expect people to do it in the right way, but we expect them to do it. And so really briefly, the model we use is it's ACTS. It's just accountability, community, transparency, and simplicity. And so it's about acts, right? It's about doing. It's about actually getting in there and doing this work. And the simplicity in part is there because this can feel complicated at times, and we want it to feel approachable to everyone. My team and I will go super deep into those things, but at the highest order, what we're saying to people is, do these things, do them well, follow these processes that we're putting in place, and we will have a more diverse and more inclusive organization.
Khalil, would you repeat the ACTS one more time? Accountability?
Yeah, so accountability, community. So how do we all come together? Transparency. So exactly what my partners were talking about. And then simplicity.
Perfect. Perfect. That's one to remember. And, you know, when you talked about the growth mindset, I was reminded of this notion that if you have a culture that says either you win or you learn, there is no such thing as a win and lose or win and fail. It's win or you learn. And if you can have an acceptance of that mentality, then you're going to be thinking about trying new things in a very, very different way. Michelle, why do you think diversity struggles and suffers so in middle management? And what can we do better to keep that talent, underrepresented talent specifically, women, in particular? How do you keep them from walking away at the point in time when they throw up their hands and say, I just can't make this work?
Yeah, and I think that there are so many factors that would attribute to why diversity suffers at the middle layer, as you put it. But middle managers are not the only managers who should be held accountable to doing the work. This is a top-down, bottom-up strategy with emphasis at what we're calling the frozen middle, where we tend to get stuck. But middle managers are really the key to the success of any DEI strategy, at least in my view. And so they must be fully bought in from the onset and have support coming from senior managers who can then cascade those messages and accountability measures, as Khalil so eloquently talked about a few moments ago. That's critical. But what tends to happen is that the messaging, the commitment, the accountability tends to fade the farther you go down in an organization. And so there's usually a lack of clear business case and rationale as to why is this important. And usually it's the middle managers who don't fully understand what's in it for them. So it's deemed secondary in contrast to other responsibilities like revenue generation and the like. So you have to give your workforce a reason to want to stay with you. And I think Khalil, just to build off of his points, one of the things that we've been really intentional about is focusing on the Great Resignation. Now that's proven across many industries to be something that we're all wrestling with. There's a new mindset and a reshifting of priorities for diverse talent to want to stay for the long haul. And so we're steadfast, at least at BlackRock, in ensuring that equal emphasis is placed on recruiting, onboarding and integration, development, advancement, and retention, and all have to be equally weighted. Because I think, to the earlier point, we tend to focus on trying to get people in the door. What we do with them while they're in the door is a whole nother discussion. So I think a couple of things need to happen. I think it's about candid and honest feedback. It's creating clear career pathways and advancement opportunities and stretch assignments. It's investing in the talent by creating leadership development programming. One of the things that we've done this year is we've launched a leadership development program for women, for Black professionals, for Latinx professionals. And it's been incredibly successful in terms of our people feeling invested in, feeling seen, heard, and valued in a lot of different ways, giving them exposures and different experiences to the leadership of the organization where they're not an unknown entity. So it's worked wonders for us. So I would say this notion of investing in talent and creating bespoke leadership development, that has worked incredibly well for us. But also measuring progress via the employee opinion survey and really listening to our people and understanding what their lived experiences are. That's really proven to be incredibly successful for us. But one of the points that Khalil made earlier is really around accountability measures and really holding our leaders' feet to the fire and making sure that all of this is aligned to our compensation, performance management processes, where their rating is impacted, their bonus is impacted, and their merit increase is impacted in ways that they don't want to see that happen over time. And then the last point I would say is support systems for your people is incredibly important, and making sure that they also feel seen and heard in a lot of different ways, making sure that they're not left to their own devices to figure out how they're going to survive in our organization. So sponsorship and mentorship, employee networks and the like, all of that is incredibly helpful.
Well, thank you so much, Michelle. You've heard from our three panelists. They've given you some rich information to take away. And I'm asking you to think about, in the audience, one or two things that you can take back and implement within your organizations, because we promised you actionable ideas. And I think you've had a treasure trove of them. I want to move on to the next topic we said we would discuss today, which was intersectional allyship. And I've been speaking a lot about it because let me define what intersectionality is. It's the way in which the various factors of our identities intersect and they come together to form a unique set of experiences. And as a result of that, some amazing strengths that go with it. It's important for all of you, no matter where you are in your career journey or your life, to understand the concept of stepping up on behalf of others. Everybody believes I need to have a certain rank or title to do that. And I'm going to challenge you to turn that on its head and say, what privilege do I have that I can use on behalf of someone else? Part of understanding it is also realizing that we're all each accountable for creating that sense of inclusion and belonging. Whether it's your place of work or your community, you have to be intentional in your approach and recognize the need to see others in a more holistic way, as opposed to just how they show up in systems. You know, people show up a certain way. Can you look beyond that at who the whole person is? And remember, it always starts with you. Are you going to have the courage to stand up for something or someone, even if you're feeling scared or uncomfortable, when you recognize that what is happening is wrong or unfair? You may have to find a little bit of a roundabout way of addressing it, but don't just walk away and say, oh my God, too bad it happened. I wish I could have done something. Will you use your own privilege to help those who lack it? Look at yourself as part of a larger network of people who are ultimately trying to make the whole world a better place. And each of us has the ability to be empathetic, to do something for someone else. Give yourself that permission to be that agent of change on behalf of your DEI team. I don't care what your rank, title, or position is in your organization. Know that you're an extension of your organization's DEI team. So with that, my first question goes to Jolinda. I want you to share some examples of men and women who are actively working to support underrepresented talent. What does that look like in action, Jolinda?
Suba, I really couldn't say it better than you just did, which is using your position of privilege and power to assist another group. And perhaps it's a group you don't belong to. I want to just tell a short story. Early on in my civil rights career, I was with an organization that purported to support civil rights. That's what we were all there to do. A young woman who I worked with, one of my colleagues, came to me crying one day, really just venting. She didn't expect anything from me. She didn't want me to do anything about it, but she was venting about the fact that she was 6 months pregnant. She had gone to our office director and asked for a leave schedule that would accommodate her needs and her family's needs while also meeting the needs of our employer. And she was turned down. And I listened to exactly what she had proposed and really couldn't see a flaw in her plan. And I asked a couple of questions and found out that 2 other pregnant women in the office had also been turned down. And our office director was a woman, and I thought, well, this is odd, but you know, I am not pregnant, and I'm going to go in and fight for this because this makes no sense to me. And I learned later that it was the fact that a woman stepped forward who wasn't pregnant and who wasn't asking for leave that actually turned the tide on that decision. I offer that story for a couple of reasons. Number one, this was a group that I wasn't a part of, but I saw the impact it had on the office as a whole. And if we're looking to build inclusive environments, we have to step forward as allies, whether it's a group that we're a part of or not. Allyship is often about supporting a group that you may stand outside of. But Suba, as you mentioned, it's important to empathize with the humanity in everyone. We all come from families. We know how important it is to support families. That means men and women. And the support might look different depending on who you're talking to and what they need. So that's one thing. I think that's important. The second thing I think is just a derivation of that. It's really just another example. One of the things in a prior organization that I was with, one of the ways that we measured and held individual leaders accountable was for sponsoring, Michelle, and mentoring a person or a group that they did not belong to, sort of instilling that practice into the accountability of their performance. So as a senior leader, I was required to step forward and mentor as well as sponsor. And those are 2 separate topics that we could spend hours talking about. Individuals or groups who did not look like me. that taught me a tremendous amount about that group. That taught that group, gave them exposure and taught them about how senior leadership may see things in a way that they didn't quite understand. But I took that practice away as a best practice. It's really served me in my career, and I've shared that with other senior leaders as a way to, Suba, I heard you say, and I think I heard Michelle say as well, really learn to empathize with groups that you may not belong to, but also learn about their experiences and begin to see individuals a little more holistically than just how they show up in systems. I love that quote. I'm going to use that.
Well, you know what I loved about what you said, very actionable. And I'm going to challenge the audience to think about, who are you going to step up to speak about? Think about what Jolinda said. She was not pregnant. She did not need that accommodation, but she spoke on behalf of it. And that made it more powerful and heard differently. Who can you do that for? Think about that. And secondly, as you look at your ERGs, very often it will be the Black leader or the LGBTQ leader who will step up to be the executive sponsor for that respective organization. Try and turn that on its head. Figure out somebody who doesn't belong to that group. It'll be a two-way learning. It'll be a great experience for the leader, and of course, enormously supportive and helpful to the ERG themselves. So great points. My
Suba,
next one
before
is,
you move on,
yes.
can I add one more? I'm sorry, I was looking at Khalil, and he helped me. The look in his face helped me to remember something. The other thing I want to suggest that we can do as individual leaders, you know, there are systems things that we can do, but the other thing we can do as individual leaders is always remember to bring someone along with you.
Yes.
Whether they're different than you or not, bring someone along with you. So when you're going to a speaking event, take someone with you so that they understand what that experience is like. When you're going to a meeting with the board, is there someone who can come and take notes? You know, I've often made it clear that your job here is to sit in the back of the room and be quiet, don't ask any questions, but you learn a tremendous amount. And someone did that for me, so that when you are in those offices, those experiences, you know how to behave and you know what's expected and you know where you can push.
Great, great suggestions. Thank you. Michelle, you've created another complete separate platform through your books and the work that you've done with the community of women and women of color. And, you know, we have far more power as women of color. As we've progressed in our careers, we have often found that we have much more power and influence externally versus internally. And so how can people learn to leverage that momentum? Can you share with the audience ideas that they can take away and put in play? You're on mute, Michelle. Sorry.
Sorry about that. You would think I would learn by now to take myself off mute. So it's an interesting question in that my external platform grew as a result of the years that I've spent in the DEI space. Most people don't realize I've been doing this for almost 30 years. And for several multinational organizations and industries, both inside and outside of the United States. So essentially what I've done is just shared my unvarnished, truthful stories. I've used myself as the protagonist to make salient points. We are, as DEI experts, we are change agents, impact seekers, constructive disruptors. And I enjoy the art of storytelling. And I also believe in full vulnerability. And so if I can use myself as the protagonist, where I tend to throw myself under the bus to make these points, that's the way I think we all learn, is by using very concrete, crisp and articulate facts and experiences that we have. And I think that's what's really, that's what grew my external platform. It wasn't my intention to do that. It just so happened that I had this following as a result of my being direct and honest in terms of how I show up in the world. And so, you know, just my purpose has always been in these workplaces is to leave a place in better condition than when I entered. And I can confidently say that no matter where I've been able to do a little bit of that. So I tend to use my experiences as a woman of color to tell stories that resonate with both business leaders and broader audiences. So it was not my intention to grow the audience externally. That was a result of the work that I've done over the years.
Well, Michelle, I'm a personal beneficiary of that. You've been a dear friend for a long time. When you are able to share that authentically, two things happen. Senior leaders are inspired by it in one way to understand someone who has been successful, who they see as a peer, and yet whose journey in this has been so different than their own. That is one set of lessons to impart. And then the inspiration to the younger people that are up and coming to say, this, I've always repeated, if you can't see it, you can't be it. And they look at someone, like you or me, and they say to themselves, it's possible. It's not going to be without its pain, but it's possible. And that is powerful. Thank you. Khalil, we talked about maximizing your workforce in order to have this amazing workplace that you're going to build. And the idea of not changing beliefs, but changing behaviors. Can you share that with the audience? I found that incredibly inspiring.
Happy to. And, ideally, it's wonderful to change both, right? If you can get people to believe deeply in something and have an emotional connection to it and change their behaviors, absolutely wonderful. Let's take both of those. If it's a buy one, get one free, I will take both. But the challenge that we have in a lot of spaces is that we attempt to change the beliefs in the hope that that will then change behaviors. And we've seen through years and years of research around, the traditional unconscious bias training that was essentially, hey, you're all biased. So now that you know that, please go back to your desk and stop being biased and everything's going to get better, right? And we're like, it'd be wonderful if it worked that way, but it doesn't. And so, Suba, you mentioned before around dieting, right? Or weight loss, New Year's resolutions. How many of us have said, okay, this year's the year I'm going to do it. I'm super committed. I'm totally on board. And I've worked with lots of executives that say, I had a strong mother, I have daughters, I am all about equality in the workplace. And then you look at their senior leadership team and it's a lot of people that look like them. And so ultimately what we're trying to do is to fundamentally change the way that we show up. We're trying to change our behaviors, and everyone here has spoken about the systems, because if you change the way that you interview, if you change your entire process, then what you don't need to do is change each individual, because you put them in a better system. And so Michelle, you spoke about, removing defining characteristics from resumes, right? That is not saying, okay, I'm going to stop being biased against Jamal and start treating everybody equitably. It's to recognize that some of those biases are so innate and so unconscious that I can't will them out. And so when I build a better system and say, you know what, this person's name doesn't really matter. So what I'm going to do is just evaluate their skills and their competencies and their experience. And now I've kind of, I've hacked that bias, right? I've built a better behavior. And ultimately the beliefs hopefully will come along with that, because I'll see, wow, I'm selecting different people, I'm promoting different people, I'm having better experiences. This is great. But the natural tendency is that we want to change the beliefs with the intent that that will change the behaviors. The science just shows it doesn't work. And we know from our own experiences it doesn't work. And yet if we change our behaviors, we can inherently change our beliefs as well. So it's just a more productive and more effective orientation.
Well, thank you, Khalil. We have a little less than 5 minutes left, and I had two questions I wanted to ask you both, all of you. So I'm going to pose the questions, and I'm going to ask you to pick the question that you can respond to in sort of a succinct way. The first one is, are you seeing a lot of pushback from white men, parents of white boys, men who don't think their sons have a shot anymore? What do you tell those parents or peers who happen to be those white men or even white women? And how are your companies responding to it? That's one question. The other one is an example in your career where you felt seen, heard, valued. I think, Jolinda, you mentioned one thing already where someone invited you into a meeting, allowed you to experience that. Some sort of experience where senior leadership lifted you up and you felt empowered as a result of it. And you take away and pick one of the two, and let's have the audience hear from you about that.
So if I may.
Yes, Michelle?
I'd like to answer the question around the example in your career where you may have felt seen, heard, or valued. So going back many years, I was invited at a company I worked for. I was invited to join the CEO and the executive leadership in the boardroom for a meeting. And these executives were sitting in the boardroom at the table when I walked into the room. And there were chairs that were strategically behind the table for the guests and speakers who were scheduled to speak. Since I was not an executive leader at that time, I decided to take a seat in the row just behind the boardroom table. The CEO stopped the meeting immediately and said, "Michelle, why are you sitting in the back of the room? You come here and you sit right next to me." Now, I was embarrassed at that moment because I wasn't sure what was happening. And although I was not their peer, the CEO made me feel like their equal. It was at that moment where I felt seen, heard, and valued. And since then, I always make it a point to sit at the boardroom table in any room that I enter, because I believe that I have the right, I've earned the right to sit amongst those who might be more senior. So that's a clear, concrete example that I can think of, but that was one of the most pivotal, visceral examples that I can give you in terms of the moments where I felt seen, heard, and valued.
Thank you, Michelle.
If I could just build on what Michelle said, I think there's a secondary lesson in that as we seek to lift more women up. Michelle, when you take somebody with you to those meetings and they see you sit at the table, they also learn to sit at the table. They learn that as they move up in the organization, that their seat is at that table. And I think that's just an incredibly powerful lesson for people to see and hear and feel and be a part of. So it really just can't be understated, the importance of that.
Great point, Jolinda. Anybody about what you're saying to some of your white colleagues who are saying, what happens to my kids? I know we're almost out of time, Gwen. She's coming here to give us the hook, but I do want to hear that briefly if you can, Khalil.
Yeah, I'll get in, and then Jolinda would love to hear from you as well. I would just say, and I totally empathize, and it's one of the reasons we focus on inclusion and engagement alongside diversity, because the goal is that a rising tide raises all boats. The other thing that I say, as I know people well enough, is the numbers don't back your concerns. We've still got more than enough folks that are getting into universities, getting into senior leader roles. The goal is not to swing the pendulum in the other direction, it's to stop the pendulum from swinging. That's what we're working towards.
Well said. Well said. Any last words of wisdom, Jolinda?
There's no way I can beat that. There's nothing additional I would say, except I want people to really consider it's not either or, it's both and. Perfect.
What a great way to end this. And I know the audience had some questions on what can small businesses do? There is no difference in this sort of behavior, whether you're recruiting one person or 100,000 people, no difference in terms of how you look at it and what you apply to it. Empathy, vulnerability, all of these qualities, creating inclusive environments, there is no difference whether you're a small business or a large organization. In fact, I would say to you, it's a little easier in a small business than it is in a large organization, because turning a big ship is really hard. With that, please join me in thanking Jolinda, Michelle, and Khalil for their words of wisdom. And thank you for being such incredible panelists and friends.
Thank you,
Suba, and as well, Michelle, Jolinda, and Khalil, thank you. I loved it from starting off with the Neuroscience Leadership Institute, stopping the pendulum, the not the either or, but really emphasizing, Suba, this is about behavior. This is about the way we're acting, how we're showing up where we are. So I really appreciate it. So thank you all. To the audience, we have a short break. We will start our next panel on driving corporate purpose at 1:10 p.m. Thank you, and talk to you all soon. Suba, awesome.
Thank you for attending.
Awesome.
Thanks, guys. Appreciate you. All of you. Thank you so
Thank
much.
you,
Khalil,
everybody.
Michelle, and Jolinda, you guys were rock stars.
Thanks so much. That was fun.
Yes,
It was good.
Thank you. You guys
Yeah.
were
Good to be
great.
with you
You are
all.
a rock star. I need to spend time with you.
I think we all need to
I
spend some
always
time
have fun
together.
with you guys.
Khalil will
You
do
know
that,
what?
right?
Yeah, thank you.